The rain poured heavily as Emily rushed into the small cafe, drenched and out of breath. She was a mess. Her designer clothes, although expensive, did nothing to mask the exhaustion in her eyes. She just needed a place to sit down, dry off, and relax. She found a corner, pulled out her phone, and tried to forget about the endless meetings, the pressure of her family's business, and the overwhelming loneliness she felt despite her riches. From across the room, Jake noticed her, a kind-hearted soul with a genuine smile and a way of making others feel seen. His eyes caught hers, and for a moment, everything slowed down. He walked over, offering her a warm, genuine smile. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice full of concern. "Just a little tired," Emily said, surprised by his kindness. Jake couldn't just leave her there. He ordered coffee, sat down, and they began talking. He had no idea who she was, just another face in the crowd, another person to brighten up with his gentle nature. As they talked, the conversation flowed effortlessly. Jake learned that Emily was a businesswoman, but he didn't ask much more. He wasn't interested in her wealth or status. He was drawn to her spirit, her vulnerability. At the end of their chat, Emily tried to pay for her meal, but Jake stopped her. No, it's on me," Jake said, with a friendly smile. He felt a connection, something beyond the usual surface-level interactions. Emily hesitated, but then accepted. She wasn't used to people being this kind, not without expecting something in return. "Thank you," she said softly, feeling a warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. The next day, Emily couldn't stop thinking about Jake. She had seen countless people come and go in her life, but there was something about him that lingered. It wasn't just his looks or his charm. It was his kindness, his genuine interest in her well-being. She couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to have someone like him in her life. Meanwhile, Jake had also been thinking about Emily. He didn't know who she was, just a woman who seemed to be carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. He found himself hoping she'd come back to the cafe, so they could talk more. 3 days later, Emily found herself back in the same cafe, although this time she wasn't drenched in rain. As she walked in, she saw Jake sitting by the window, a cup of coffee in hand, working on his laptop. She hesitated for a moment, but then approached him. "Hi," she said softly, unsure of what to say. Jake looked up and smiled warmly. "Hey, it's good to see you again. Would you like to join me?" She nodded and sat down, feeling more comfortable than she had in a while. The conversation picked up right where it had left off, and as they talked, Emily realized how different Jake was from anyone she'd ever met. He didn't care about her last name, her family's wealth, or her business ventures. He cared about her as a person. After a few more casual meetups, the connection between Emily and Jake deepened. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset, Emily felt the need to open up. "I have something to tell you," she said nervously. Jake looked at her, his eyes filled with genuine curiosity. "What is it?" "I'm not just a normal woman," she confessed. "I'm the heir to a billion-dollar company. My family, well, they've always been in the spotlight. People want something from me. They always have." Jake was quiet for a moment, processing her words. He could see the pain in her eyes, the weight of expectations that hung over her. "I don't care about any of that, Emily. You're more than your family or your wealth." Her heart fluttered. Maybe, just maybe, she had found someone who could see her for who she really was. As the weeks passed, Emily and Jake found themselves growing closer. Their connection felt real, raw, and undeniable. Every moment together felt like a new chapter in an evolving story, one filled with laughter, stolen glances, and quiet moments that spoke louder than words ever could. They would meet at their favorite cafe, sitting in the same corner booth where it all began. They shared stories about their lives, their dreams, and their fears. Yet, despite their growing intimacy, there was something Emily couldn't shake, a fear that sat deep inside her, heavy and suffocating. She had fallen for him. There was no doubt about it. But there was also a nagging uncertainty that haunted her every conversation, every touch, every smile. What would Jake think of her if he knew the truth? What would happen if he found out who she really was? What her family was? What her life entailed? Could he love her for her? Or would he see her as nothing more than another entitled heir to a billion-dollar empire? Would he even stay, knowing the truth? The tension weighed on her heart like a stone. Every time she looked into Jake's eyes, she saw the reflection of her own vulnerability. She couldn't keep pretending that the secrets she was hiding didn't matter. They did. They mattered in ways she couldn't even articulate. Her life was a carefully curated lie, and she wasn't sure how long she could keep it up. Jake, too, felt the shift in their relationship. He wasn't blind. He knew there was something Emily wasn't telling him, something important. She was always so guarded, careful about the details of her life. She'd never introduced him to her friends or family, and whenever she talked about her past, she would gloss over certain parts, as if they were too painful or too complicated to touch. He didn't press her, not at first. He believed she would open up in her own time, but the more he got to know her, the more he felt the weight of her silence. There was a depth to her, a raw honesty in her presence, but it was only half of the person he could sense. The other half was hidden in the shadows, and Jake couldn't ignore it forever. He wasn't sure what she was hiding, but he knew it was big. Whatever it was keeping them apart in ways he couldn't understand. So, as they sat across from each other in that familiar cafe booth, the atmosphere between them was thick with unspoken words. Emily's eyes were distant, her thoughts clearly far away, while Jake watched her, his heart full of emotion and uncertainty. She was sitting there, so close to him, yet so far away, and it was driving him crazy. "Emily," Jake said softly, his voice low but filled with a hint of urgency. "You can tell me anything. You know that, right?" Her eyes flickered up to meet his, but there was a flicker of something, fear, maybe, or doubt, behind them. She looked away, as if the words were stuck in her throat, but she said nothing. Jake let out a frustrated sigh, his fingers tracing the edge of his coffee cup. "I don't know what you're afraid of, but I can't keep doing this. We're falling for each other, and if we're going to make this work, you need to trust me. You need to let me in." But Emily couldn't. Not yet. The truth was too big. The weight of her past, her family, her wealth, it was all too much. If she told him the truth, everything would change. And she wasn't sure she could handle that. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Jake had been sitting at his desk, trying to push through another mundane workday, when a notification popped up on his phone. He didn't even think to check it at first, but something compelled him to glance. What he saw made his blood run cold. The headline on the article read, "The Billionaire Heiress Who Wants to Be Normal." His heart sank as he read the story, the pieces of Emily's life falling into place in a way that shattered everything he thought he knew. Emily, the woman he had fallen for. The kind, gentle, funny woman who had shared her soul with him. She wasn't just a regular woman from a humble background. She wasn't just someone trying to escape the pressures of a high-powered career. She was a billionaire heiress. Her family's empire was massive, and Emily was the future of it all. He had suspected something, of course, the way she would get anxious whenever anyone mentioned money, the reluctance to discuss her past. He had put the pieces together in his mind, but he never imagined it would be like this. This was not a simple secret. This was something far deeper. With a mix of anger, betrayal, and confusion, Jake stormed out of his office, unable to process the flood of emotions rushing through him. How could she keep this from him? How could she lie about something so monumental? He needed to confront her. There was no avoiding it. Later that night, Emily found herself sitting alone in the cafe. Her mind was racing, her nerves frazzled as she went over every moment with Jake, wondering if she could have done something differently. She had to tell him the truth, but she wasn't sure how. And then, just as she was about to drown in her thoughts, Jake appeared. He didn't walk in casually this time. He was there, determined, his eyes full of questions. His gaze locked onto hers immediately, and she knew. She knew he had found out. "Emily," Jake said, his voice tight. "We need to talk." The air between them grew thick. Emily stood up slowly, her heart hammering in her chest. She tried to find the right words, but the shame, the guilt, everything she had been hiding came crashing down on her. "I didn't want you to know," she whispered, barely able to meet his gaze. "I didn't want you to see me as just my wealth." Jake took a step toward her, his fists clenched. The hurt in his eyes was unmistakable, but there was something else there, too. "Emily, I don't care about your money. I don't care about your family. I care about you. But you have to stop hiding from me. You can't keep running away from who you are." Emily's tears began to fall, and she broke. The weight of everything she had kept inside for so long was too much. "I'm sorry," she sobbed, her voice breaking. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know if you could ever love me once you knew who I really was." Jake's expression softened as he reached for her hand, holding it gently. "I don't care about the money, Emily. I care about you. The real you. The woman I've been getting to know. You don't have to hide anymore." The next day, Jake left town. Emily didn't know what to feel. He had told her he didn't care about her wealth, but she saw the hurt in his eyes. She knew he had been betrayed by the secrecy she had kept. She had built walls around herself for so long, never letting anyone get close enough to see who she really was. But now, Jake knew, and he wasn't sure how to move forward. He needed space. And Emily, she needed time to think. For the next few days, Emily tried to focus on her work, but every thought led back to Jake. Was he going to come back? Could he forgive her? Would they ever be able to move past this? She had always been so used to controlling every part of her life. But now, she was lost. She spent her nights alone in her penthouse, surrounded by the emptiness of her luxurious apartment, the weight of her decisions pressing down on her chest. She couldn't make this right on her own. She needed Jake to understand, but she also needed to understand herself. The day Emily had been dreading came. Jake returned. She found him sitting at their usual cafe spot, staring into his coffee, lost in thought. For a moment, she just stood there, watching him, unsure of what to say. His face looked tired, but his eyes still held that warmth, that familiarity that she had grown to love. Emily walked over slowly, her heart pounding. "Jake," she said softly, unsure of how he would react. Jake looked up, and his face lit up with relief, his tense posture softening. "Emily," he said, his voice full of emotion, "I've missed you. I've missed us." There was no need for words. They didn't need to explain anything. They just sat together, feeling the weight of the unspoken connection. For the first time, Emily allowed herself to truly believe in the possibility of love. As they talked, they realized they weren't starting from scratch. They weren't starting with a clean slate. What they had was something real, something worth fighting for. They talked for hours, laying everything out in the open. The fears, the uncertainties, the confusion, it all came to light. And together, they decided to start fresh. They wouldn't let their pasts define them. They would create a future together, one step at a time. No expectations, no pressure. A few weeks passed since their last conversation, and things had started to feel more normal between Emily and Jake. But deep inside, Emily was still afraid. What if Jake was just saying he didn't care about her wealth to keep her close? What if he would eventually leave her when the truth became too much to bear? One evening, as they walked through the city, Emily tried to suppress her fears, but they kept creeping back in. Jake noticed her quiet demeanor and stopped in his tracks. "Emily," he said softly, his hand gently brushing hers. "I know this hasn't been easy for you, and I can't imagine how hard it must be to trust someone again." She turned to face him, the weight of his words sinking in. "What are you saying, Jake?" she asked, her voice shaky. Jake smiled, stepping closer. "I'm saying, I want to prove to you that I'm here for you, no matter what. I'm not interested in your money, your name, or your family's business. I just want you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, opening it to reveal a beautiful silver bracelet. "This is for you," he said, "to show you I'm serious about us." Tears filled Emily's eyes. She didn't know what to say. His sincerity was overwhelming. He wasn't like the others. He was real. And for the first time in a long time, she felt hope. Days passed, and as Emily tried to adjust to this new reality of love with Jake, her family's expectations became impossible to ignore. Her father called her into his office one afternoon, his tone cold as always. "Emily, you need to get back to work. This business isn't going to run itself," he said, his eyes never leaving the papers in front of him. "The investors are breathing down our necks. You're not a child anymore. You need to stop wasting time with your romantic distractions." Emily clenched her fists, biting back the anger that rose in her throat. "I'm not wasting time, Father. I'm learning how to live a life that's mine." Her father's eyes met hers, his expression hardening. "If you think this relationship with some nobody is going to change things, you're wrong. The business needs you. The company needs you. Your future is here, not with some lowly cafe guy." The sting of his words cut deeper than she cared to admit. But Emily stood her ground. "I can't live like this anymore. Not for you, not for anyone." She walked out of the office, her heart in turmoil. The pressure of her family's expectations weighed heavily on her, but she wasn't sure she could give up Jake for the life they had planned for her. The thought made her feel like she was suffocating. That evening, Emily met Jake at their usual spot, the quiet cafe that had become their safe haven. She didn't want to hide any part of herself from him, but the weight of her family's demands made her feel like she was carrying the world on her shoulders. "Jake, I need to tell you something," Emily started, her voice trembling slightly. "My family, they don't want me to be with you. They don't think you're good enough for me." Jake's eyes darkened slightly, a flash of anger crossing his face, but he took a deep breath, calming himself before responding. "Emily, I didn't come into your life for your money. I came into your life because I like you, because I care about you. What your family thinks doesn't matter to me." "But it matters to me," she said, tears threatening to spill from her eyes. "I'm torn between two worlds, Jake. I can't lose you, but I can't turn my back on everything I've been taught either. Jake gently took her hands in his, looking deeply into her eyes. Then, let's find a way together. We'll build a future that's ours, no one else's. Emily wasn't sure how they'd make it work, but for the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope. The following weekend, Emily received an invitation to a major gala her family was hosting, a high society event where the richest of the rich gathered. It was an opportunity for Emily to present herself as the heir to the family business, to fulfill the role her father demanded of her. But she was torn. The thought of being there without Jake by her side made her heart ache. "I can't go to that gala without you," she admitted to Jake, her voice filled with emotion. "I don't belong in that world anymore. I want to be with you, not them." Jake stood there for a long moment, deep in thought. "Emily, I understand what you're going through, but I don't think this is the right time for me to meet your family. They won't understand me, and you don't deserve to be caught in the middle of a battle between us." Emily felt her heart break. She knew he was right. Her family wouldn't approve of Jake, no matter how genuine he was. But the idea of walking into that gala alone, pretending to be something she wasn't, felt like a betrayal to herself. The night of the gala arrived, and Emily made her way through the grand entrance, feeling more alone than ever. As she walked through the crowd of well-dressed elites, her mind kept drifting back to Jake. Was it possible to have both? Could she be part of her family's world and still have the love she found with Jake? The gala was everything Emily had feared: superficial, cold, and suffocating. Her father introduced her to potential suitors and business partners, each one more self-interested than the last. The weight of the expectation on her shoulders became unbearable. In the midst of the evening, Emily excused herself and stepped out onto the balcony, breathing in the cool night air. She had never felt more out of place in her entire life. And then, as if fate had intervened, Jake appeared at the door. He wasn't in a tuxedo or a suit. He was simply wearing his usual casual attire. But to Emily, he looked perfect. "You came," she whispered, her eyes wide with disbelief. "I couldn't stay away," Jake said, walking up to her with a smile. "I don't care about this world, Emily. I care about you, and I think it's time you made a choice." Emily looked out at the city skyline, her heart torn between the life her family expected for her and the life she wanted with Jake. She turned to face him, her decision clear. "I choose you, Jake. I choose us." With that, she reached out and kissed him, finally free from the pressure and expectations that had held her captive for so long.